Okay. Hello and welcome everybody. I'm Valentina Cagnola. I'm taking care of the contents of Exans, of the conferences and presentations. I'm of Equipe Exhibit, the company that organizes Exans, but this conference and some others are organized together with Ascensional, the study center that you will find the desk of Ascensional here in front of the conference room. I welcome you, and I'm very, very happy to see you again after a long time. And this is the first one of a lot of meetings, talks, presentations, and so on. And I hope you will enjoy them. I introduce you our moderator, that is Marin, that supported us with a lot of conferences. You will see her again and again here. And she will introduce you the first workshop of this edition of Exans. Thanks so much. Bye. And enjoy.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's nice to see you all here, and I think it's nice for all of us to be back together again in a physical meeting space. So my name is Marin, and for those of you that don't know me, I'm a beauty and fragrance veteran. I started behind the counter, then I was department manager at Saks Fifth Avenue in San Francisco. Then I was the fragrance buyer at Sephora in the United States from 2000 to 2008, where I was instrumental in creating most of the strategies for fragrance, which included rollerballs, sample sets, and touchscreen finders in stores. So those were my babies at the time. And then I transferred within the LVMH group to Paris, to Parfums Givenchy, where I was the business development manager overseeing North and South America. So I did that for 10 years, and then Silvio Levi, who is one of the co-founders of Exans, called me, and he said, you know, I want to create a type of website that will continue the feeling of Exans, but online. So honestly, if you like what you experience here, come on over to exsensional.com and you will see the kind of content that we produce. I'm an advisor and the key contributor interviewing brands, perfumers, retailers, writing about business solutions, and finding key important things about fragrance, such as why we're here today. So let me just move ahead on the slides. Okay, so the context here is when you came in today, I don't know if you saw the exhibit that was facing the welcome desk. It's called Fleeting Sense and Color. So what happens is in the job that I have, I read about 50 industry newspapers every day, and I'm always looking for something very cool that relates to fragrance. I'm also someone who's constantly in a museum when I'm not working. So when I came across an article about a museum that was combining these two passions, 17th century Dutch art with fragrance that was specifically created to depict what was in the artwork, so you would smell what that was, I thought, I really want to write about this. So I contacted the curators, and then the curators put me in touch with Bernardo Fleming, who's going to introduce himself in a minute, and I wrote about it. And then as soon as lockdowns lifted, I went to see the exhibit, and I wrote about it again for the website. In fact, the article is just outside at the Exsensional desk if you want to read it. And anyway, Silvio then said to me, this is really cool. I want you to bring it to Exans. So an army of people got together and we made it happen. So please take a look, smell, and let us know what you think. And with that, that's the context of why we're here, to talk about how scent can enhance and be a way of adding a different element to an exhibit, to an event, to bring multisensorial elements together. So with that, I'm going to let Bernardo introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his role at IFF.
Great. Hey, hello, good morning, ciao, buongiorno. My name is Bernardo Fleming. I'm responsible for trend-driven innovation at IFF. I've been in the fragrance industry for more than 20 years, and my expertise and my passion made us pretty much to become this bridge between the cultural institutions like museums and the creative force, perfumers and the creative force at IFF, and working over the last decades, really much bringing the scent dimension into museums. That was something that we've been working on, and that's what we'll be sharing today.
And then Birgit works with Bernardo. She's senior perfumer at IFF. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
It's good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm senior perfumer at IFF. And in my day-to-day work, I create fragrances for products and brands that delight consumers' lives. And on top of this, I also work with Bernardo and our young perfumers on several projects for different museums, like the Art Museum, the Mauritshuis in Den Haag, and the Rijksmuseum and the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam.
Okay. So what we want to start by talking about is how do you go about this? So the museum came, 17th century Dutch art. You have a painting of the canals. What did it smell like? You have a painting of being inside a spice shop, which when you think that at the time Holland was the center of trade, so what did it smell like? Pomander, wearing a pomander, what did it smell like? So tell us about creating the brief. How do you define a brief for something that's so, it's abstract, It
is definitely unconventional because it's not the kind of brief that you have for a product. So here is the first phase. It's really to understand what the museum goal is, so what they want to bring, sent into the context of the artwork. Who's the target audience? What's going to be the exhibition for how long? To understand the space, the number of artwork, and very much define their wish and wants. Okay, and based on our expertise, we can really start shaping on how this scent experience in the museum context can be. So that's very much on the execution part. Now, when it comes to the creative part, that's an extra challenge because you deal with people from the museum. They're experts in art, but they lack that capacity of translating their needs into sense. So it's first to understand what's the goal, what are the key messages that we want to bring in order that we reinforce the experience of the museum through smell, and to understand what are the narratives that you want to build. Okay, so it's going to be very much about the historic context. It's going to be more about the materials that the artist works. So really try to deconstruct all these elements into the creative brief from a team that needs to work, because a lot of changes, in many cases we have technical challenges, okay? But also from a creative point of view is to understand what's the goal, what are the different materials, what are the different ways of bringing scent into the museum context.
And I remember you telling me it's also like what emotions they want to have come up when you're standing in front of something.
Yeah, definitely, and because I think art, it's not always pleasant per se, but it really needs to provoke. So in many cases, we need to understand what is that emotion, what is that provocation that we need to bring in a way that doesn't confront the artwork, but in a way reinforces that message that you want to do. So in a way, it's understand what are those elements that we need to really bring into the olfactive expression of the artwork. In some cases, it can be just a simple raw material, so very much identifying what would that element would be. But now it really means historically referred or reconstruction of formulas that have been part of the museum knowledge for years.
Yeah. So then that goes into the ingredient palette, and like, for example, let's talk about a specific, like the canals. So here you had such a great story that you told me about this painting, and then it's like, well, what part of it do they want to talk about, and then how do you identify which ingredients to put?
So that particular painting, it's a view of an Amsterdam canal, and the Amsterdam canal, basically, when we were briefed and we started to work on the brief with the museum, was a kind of a pleasant smell of Amsterdam. You had the linden trees, you had the watery aspect, it's a very nice, but we didn't depict a latrine, a small toilet, which was very much the story that they wanted to highlight into the story from the museum. So it was very much bringing the malodor as a key element. Usually when the perfumers need to create, they need to, as Birgit said, something that delights the visitor. In this case was something that really we wanted to bring that nasty element, because that's really what the canal smelled back then. And the selection of the material, it's reviewing, and I think Birgit can talk about that, it's also reviewing the palette, not only of the ingredients, but also the technologies and the elements that are really part of the creation.
Yeah, because I know, I mean, typically you create a fragrance that should smell pleasant. So tell us, Birgit, about how do you go about creating a fragrance that is not?
Mm-hmm. Yes, in my daily work, I'm asked to create fragrances that people love. But in the case of creating a fragrance for an artwork, I sometimes do the opposite of creating a nice smelling fragrance. So most of the time, the fragrance can really bring you back to how it smelled in the past, be it the stinking smell of the canals, the horses in the street, the linden blossom trees next to the canals. So it's really crucial that the scent tells you the story of the artwork. And for the pomanders, we had a different approach. Here we studied old recipes. So in this way, we were able to recreate the smells of the pomanders.
Yeah. And also, I think using the ingredients in different proportions than you typically do, because you're creating something that's not pleasant. So that's out of your typical day-to-day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for the Amsterdam canal scent, I used ingredients which are rarely used because they're not really smelling that nice. I also overdosed certain ingredients, which I normally use in very small amounts. And I also made use of our IFF technologies. So I made use of our IFF living technologies to create the smell of the horses and the linden blossom trees. So to explain what is IFF living technology, that's a technology we use to absorb odor molecules from a living flower, which is still alive on the plant, so we don't have to cut the flower. So the odor molecules are absorbed and extracted, and we study and analyze the odor molecules, and in this way we can recreate the smell of the living flower.
Can be on flowers, but also can be on basically anything.
Horse,
so it's also a smell of sweaty hands or sweaty horse, which is one of the smells that we use for one of the paintwork. So it's using that technology in unconventional ways. And I think that's also, from a creative point of view, the challenge is how we use the same palette, not to create something that people love, but something that is historically referred, or there is a reconstruction, as Birgit was saying, of existing formulas from the past. And try to recreate as realistic as possible. Try to look the extraction method that were used back in time and to really replicate something that was smelled like centuries ago.
Right, right. So then we get into the storytelling. And so, I mean, what you mentioned to me was, well, it depends on, you have the painting, but what story do you want to tell? So let's talk about the Waterloo painting. So if I remember correctly, it's like the Battle of Waterloo, and you have Napoleon is there.
Yeah.
And it's a moment where he must know that it's not going well. And so what would that smell like?
So bringing the scent into related to an artwork is to understand what's the story you want to tell. Is it, as I mentioned before, is it about a specific element? It's about the historical atmosphere? Is it about the emotions that you want to understand, that you want to really to convey? And try to capture that olfactively. Okay? In many cases, have a creative freedom is to give an interpretation, but now you need to be very realistic. The example about the Battle of Waterloo at the Rijksmuseum, it's a painting of war, of death, of fear, it's really after a combat, so you have the dead bodies, you have the horses also there, so it was the mud, the sweat. So it was very an unpleasant smell that was captured very realistic, and I think Virgil did a magnificent work there. So really get that anguish, that sense of fear. But then working with the curator of the museum, she mentioned something that was an element from the narrative, from the storytelling that we couldn't miss, which is that Napoleon wore cologne to go to war. It made him feel invincible, okay? So we had to bring into that scent a dash of cologne, because when the tour guides were talking about the story, they had to really mention about that, and forces you to go into the painting, forces you to try to find in the painting Napoleon. And I think that's a very important element about scent into the storytelling. It engages, it makes it immersive, it makes people to really go into the artwork in a much more deeper and meaningful way. And these are things that are memorable. Because if I tell you that Napoleon wore a cologne, and when you smell the horse smell, you smell it, and you smell the cologne, it's something that will stick to your memory. And I think from a creative point of view, it was also part of the challenge of bringing the...
Yeah, it was also nice because we had two different versions. One where Napoleon was quite far away, so we could only smell a touch of his cologne, and one version where he was very nearby. So the smell of the cologne was quite present. So that was also interesting that you also could show how far Napoleon was also in the painting.
Yeah, and the story about that, we also work now for a project for the own museum in Germany, and was the smell of hell, okay, from El Dante. Okay, how does the hell smells? Probably if I ask each of you, you will have a different interpretation of hell, okay? Very sulfuric, burnt flesh, secretions, can be anything. So everybody in our minds, we make an olfactive impronta of how hell would be. Now, when we had to create the smell of hell, then you get into a discussion because it's very abstract. So the smell of hell would be different from me. So
Absolutely.
It was very difficult to define that. When do you put, okay, this is the smell? So I think that's also puts into when this creative iteration journey ends, and can be endless. And I think that's what we see a lot with artists. Artists working on a piece of work, and they go back, and they go back. Smell of Hell was something that also was interesting because forced us to read and to see what was...
Divine Comedy and the Inferno, which it's full of references. So there's many stories within it.
And that, from a research point of view, is very interesting to understand what were those elements that were very much referred, and try to bring them into a fragrance that there's no right or wrong, because nobody knows how hell smells, but how we can really bring this into the narrative. And this very much opens discussions with the visitors. If the guide tells you this is smell of hell, you said, I don't agree. So in a way, it opens conversations, it opens a lot of engagement that without the scent dimension, it would lack.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm going to jump ahead on one of the questions, because one of my questions to him was, well, how do you know when it's ready? You know, so how do you between you and the client, which in this case is the museum, right? Or it's the event venue, like, and so that does bring into the conversation between you as the creators and they as the client who maybe have a viewpoint, specific viewpoint.
And also speaking with people who are not scent experts. Okay, so in a way, the way that they can articulate, the way that they can, it's challenging, okay, because it's sweet, it's nice, it's nasty. Now, when you go to the nuances of expressing that usually it's a limitation. So the way we kind of, not to compete with expertise, it's very much, okay, what is it that's needed? So it's very much the brief is key, okay? It's very important to understand what we want to convey in a way that it doesn't conflict and it doesn't distract, because in a way that's the other kind of fear, okay? If scent becomes a distraction, then the focus of the exhibit is not hitting the mark.
Right.
But going back to your question, when it ends, well, one thing that always helps is the deadline of the opening. Because if the opening is in 4 years, we will have 4 years of iterations and reworks and versions, version 5 of us. So in a way, that helps us to define that.
Yeah, because they don't necessarily change the brief, do they?
No. No, but
whereas, yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing is that they, being so experts on the art, you go into, everybody feels a perfumer. I'm not a perfumer. We have a perfumers. It is in a way, let the experts do what they are experts. So let's keep that area of expertise.
Yeah.
That happens a lot with the discussions that happen within us.
Yeah.
And in that sense, in many cases, it's the perfumer who has the say in, look, this is it. Especially when it's a creative expression. When it's a reconstruction, there's no argument there.
Right, yeah. So reconstruction is when it was something like the pomander, that it actually existed and there was a recipe. Whereas the abstract is like the canals. I mean, how would you know, right? So you have to imagine. And it really pulls on the creative strength of the perfumer and their vision.
Yeah, it's also quite hard for the perfumer to say when a scent is ready. So it's also most of the time together with the curator and us who decide that the scent is ready and that it translates also the story of the artwork. But we also do trials with visitors from the museum before the exhibition opens. So in that way, we always gather information, we get feedback, and we can optimize the scents before the exhibition opens.
Okay.
And I also smell with Bernardo and my perfumer colleagues, and they help me and guide me and optimize how to optimize the fragrance.
Okay. So in this type of an exercise, which is so different, again, from the day-to-day, like what kind of key learnings, I mean, from maybe using ingredients in different proportions, or I know you said that it really makes you think out of the box very creatively, more than a typical challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what was really interesting when I created the Amsterdam Kennel scent, I worked with an IFF scientist because we wanted to incorporate a mildew malodor. And normally when I create fragrances for cleaners, we try to mask or cover those kind of malodors. But in this way, or in this case, we wanted to incorporate the malodor ingredient into the fragrance creation. So in fact, the malodor became a fragrance ingredient, which was really interesting. So I think it's always very good to look outside your daily palettes, your daily ingredient palette, and also look for technologies which you normally never will use. See how you can stretch the boundaries. So using that malodor as a fragrance ingredient was really a good learning. Yeah.
Gosh.
And I think one of the learnings for me, it's working with perfumes, it's they are putting their craft, their art, into a different context. So it's really awakening this extraordinary sense of creation, not into a product, but into an experience, and an experience that when you see it come to life, when you see it materialize, and I think the good feedback, going back to when it's done, when you see the reaction of the person smelling, looking at the artwork, and seeing their physical reaction, the way they articulate, that's, okay, boom. You feel that you achieved there, so I think that's the one, okay, next. So that's a key aspect when you see the real reactions of what's happening, how people react.
I can imagine. Yeah, that's why, like, when you go up and you go through the exhibit later today, or while you're here for the show, anybody, please come find me. I'm here. I'll be here every day. Come find me and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your feedback. It'd be interesting. So we can skip ahead to now. So we've talked about creating the fragrances, but then another thing to consider is the actual layout of the show and of the exhibit, and how do you go about doing that? So I asked Bernardo, well, you were involved in the criteria, what are the criteria to consider when you're putting scent into a museum context, so that it enhances, and it's not a distraction, as you said. So you think about the layout and the order. I mean, I remember you telling me the order is very important.
Yeah. So The first thing is that when working with museums, the first reaction is they're super interested because they know how much attraction it brings to the of visitors, but they're also nervous because there's not a lot of experience, there's not a lot of cases, so they're kind of nervous on how to integrate the scent dimension. Over the years, we managed to get a lot of learnings. We're now part of Europa, which is a consortium of experts from different backgrounds, really to bring in the olfactive heritage of Europe to life, and part of that is understanding how we can bring scent into museums. And the layout is something very important because, especially when you're dealing with visitors that are not trained, they cannot smell that much. Okay? They cannot smell more than 5 or 6 artworks. If not, it becomes noise. Okay? So really need to define what's the right number, what's the right layout, and the layout is the distribution between the space, between the artwork, but also the layout along the journey, okay? The journey and the order, okay? If you start with the civet or with the smell of the canals, which is very stinky, if you afterwards have something very light, could be the smell of the linden trees, they will not smell. So I think it's not about only the number, it's also the spacing, the distribution, and the cadence, okay? If you overwhelm too much with scent at the very beginning, then people will lose interest at the end. If you put at the end, people will rush until the end because they want to smell. So how we can really make that holistic journey something memorable and something that also you don't have bottlenecks. And as basic ideas, you have people who want to smell, but others who don't want to smell. So if you have people in front of the artwork and you smelling, you will not be very happy, okay? So where do you place it in front of the artwork? What's the delivery system, okay? The delivery system is how you're going to bring scent. Is it going to be through smelling strips? Is it going to be like upstairs with a pump? How do you instruct to make it intuitive? How do you, so there's a lot of elements that will define the success or not. And it's not per se on the olfactive expression. It's not on the great work that the perfumer might be. If the execution falls flat, then it's again, it is a mimic, it's a distraction. So I think it's not only the element of having the right sense, but also the right way of bringing sense into the experience. And these are all the different elements that we are really capturing and documenting as trying to build a playbook on how to bring that into the experiences.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a puzzle. You know, it's really a puzzle. And I remember the other thing you told me was you have to think about how, like in the case that we have here, which you see the image on the screen is the foot operated, the foot pedal diffuser, which is what we have here. You have to think about like how long the exhibit is going to be and how long the fragrance is active, like when you need to change it, right? Because it's only going to be good for so long, right? So that's another...
So that's a key aspect of the brief that I mentioned before, is to understand for how long it's going to be there. Also because the amount of oil, how regular you need to replenish, because the more volatile smells after a couple of days will not smell. So then you go, you pump, nothing comes, you pump, and again. And then you probably will skip the rest because it doesn't work, okay? So then that will be a disengagement. So that's very much the trials and errors from before. And also sometimes you get the right hedonic, okay, but then you need to make it the right performance, okay? So it is also the expertise of the perfumer to really match these two elements, is to bring that scent, but also the performance.
Okay. So now I heard that you were involved with another event that was at the Art and Olfaction Institute. Yeah. This was recent, and it was completely different and very cool. They were telling me a lot about it today. So tell me, like, this was a dream that you had that then Birgit interprets in fragrance, and the way that it is displayed is completely crazy. It's like wild.
The first aspect, I think it's something that we see more and more, is scent in museums as an art form. So you see galleries starting to bring scent, and it's something very promising for all of us who are passionate about scent. You see more and more scent integrated into different cultural and education institutions. In this case, this exhibition was on a condition that I have that I didn't know until not long ago, that is kind of rare, which is with dreaming with scent. Okay? And dreaming with scent is, I have dreams with that smell. And it's not like the sound that you incorporate a sound like a telephone or something into your dream. The scents are generating inside the brain. And so I dream with scent, and I didn't know it was something kind of rare. So when I started to read about that, I need to do something with it. So when I have one of these scented dreams, immediately after I write it down, that's the brief. And I'm lucky, and not lucky, blessed to be able to go to the office and go to Birgit or to one of our friend and colleague perfumers and like, last night I dreamt about this. And then is to try to bring my scented dreams really into a smell, a scent, a fragrance. For this exhibition, it was a collection of these scented dreams. So basically, over the years, I've been having this library of scented dreams. A lot of them worked with Birgit and with other of IFF perfumers. And it's, again, the challenge is something as abstract and vague as a dream, translated into a scent. So it's a very, and it's different from the artwork, from an artwork, because then you have the reference there. You can go into the canal, you can go into that. In this one was a good discussion. The one that, for this exhibition, one was the smell of wine and lipstick. It was a policeman with wearing lipstick and had a breath of wine, so it's a weird dream.
It's a very strange dream.
So when
policeman, lipstick, wine.
When
hopefully after work.
So when I went to Birgit and tried to bring that, it's a very good and interesting discussion, because you need to bring something vague and abstract into something that you need to translate to smell. So I think that was kind of the journey.
Yeah. So I translated the scent of Bernardo's dream. So it smelled like lipstick and wine. And also here I could use the IFF living technology to recreate the smell of wine. In this case, it was created for a fabric softener, because it was also on the picture shown on pillow sheets. So it had to smell, or it had to survive also the washing stages. So here I also had to use my fabric care ingredient knowledge. So I used also IFF ingredients which are known as substantive on dry laundry. So it survived also the washing stage. So it's also presented on the pillow sheets in the exhibition.
Yeah, and it was an exhibition that was for over a month. So then how you replenish the smell, because so it was not only a creative challenge, but also from a technical point of view, how you really make the scent work for this exhibit.
So, I mean, did they have to rewash the linens with the softener to refresh?
And they had the fabric refreshers.
Okay.
So then it was not the challenge, but also very much to apply it into different formats. So there is a very creative aspect, but there's also a technical and the expertise of the perfumer working in these categories, as Birgit mentioned, that is something that is suitable for this form.
Yeah, because in this case, I mean, the exhibit was it was about dreams. So the execution is that these are the sheets, as if the smell is in the sheets, right? That then people are experiencing that smell as how many different fragrances were there in that one?
For this one, I think we had 5.
Okay. Was it all your dreams?
All my dreams, yeah.
Okay.
So, but the creation from different perfumers, and again, the selection was basically since I discovered that this had this condition, I've been building this library,
okay.
So I have a library of scented dreams. In this case, we had to also it was the format, which was the pillows and the linen as a way of transpirating my dreams.
Okay.
But yeah, so for this one we had 5 from different perfumers, and again, it's exciting to see the reactions, okay? Because there's one of the smells is the smell of dentist. So it's a smell. My mother was a dentist, so I woke up with the smell of eugenol, which for me is the comforting feeling of my mother.
Oh, your mother, yeah.
But for everybody's reaction was dentist. They could even hear So it's also good to see on how a stimuli can generate
yeah.
different. I think that's very much what perfumery and what art is just put out there and see what the reactions are. And you have people who will love it, people who will not love it, and here you have
Yeah.
this freedom to express and to see what people react to, how they react to it.
And Birgit is able to interpret the vision in your mind and the smell.
And to embrace these crazy ideas. Because I think a lot of these creative challenges and these creative journeys is just putting our passion for scent in a context that is not the day-to-day for us. And also having the luck of being part of IFF, who in a way not only enables but really encourage us to really put our creativity out there, is to really connect, to build connections between our communities. Really much about putting the talent and the inspiration into exercises that are not per se for a product per se. So I think it's very much on really how we can really awaken that creativity and that awakening through this kind of exercises.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to bring scent into these different venues, because it does give the visitor a completely new experience that is much, like you said, it's multisensorial. So it enhances the visit in so many different ways, and it just makes it more memorable. Yeah. So I hear that there's something else that you're working on, Mondrian?
Yeah, so now at the moment it's in Den Haag, in the museum of the Kunstmuseum, it's the 150 jubilee of Piet Mondrian. And the Kunstmuseum in Den Haag has the biggest collection of work from Mondrian. They didn't want to leave this anniversary go unnoticed. So we've been approached by the curator of the museum to create the scent expression of the Mondrian. And for this work, we work, actually, Anne and Birgit, so Birgit being a senior perfumer and also working together with the young talent, because I think this is another way of transmitting expertise and transmitting knowledge. So that was very much on the mentorship that she had, was work together, recreating the smell of the 3 studios of Mondrian over his work as an artist. So the first one in Amsterdam, the second one in Paris, and the third one in New York. Do this historical research on what were olfactive cues on what we could find in Mondrian's studio. So the first one was very dark, mossy, mildew, full of carpets, full of cigar smell. It was kind of dark and stinky.
Stinky.
Again, I think in that one, a lot of the malodor technology from IFF was put as an ingredient, not something to mask, but as an ingredient. The second one was really going into the storytelling. He had in his studio a stove to keep it warm. And he always talked about the bad smell of the coal hitting the stove. Okay. So that smell was very much highlighting that story, because that was the highlight of his studio in Paris. And New York was very much the last phase of his career, and that was the first time that his studio was separate from the kitchen, so you didn't have the smell of the food. He had a bit more money, so then it was the materials they were using, the synthetic, the smell of the glue, the smell of the... So it's very much understanding what were the different historical contexts, what the materials that you could find in his studio, and also bringing the context, okay? So when he was in New York, it was more about the modernity, the going into the US in 1940, so really bringing the historical context into a scent expression. But the spotlight of this exhibition, that if you happen to be in Den Haag, strongly recommend you go and see and smell. I think that's a good thing. Go to a museum to go and see and smell. Is the Victory Bowie Bowie, which was his last masterpiece. It's a huge painting. And I think this one was a very unique creative challenge, and I will let Birgit talk about that journey, because it was a very unique way and unique brief for Birgit and Anne to create it.
Yeah, so we worked on this project together with Anne, our trainee perfumer. For him, it was really a good experience also to discover the IFF ingredient palettes, but also work with our LMR Naturals. So LMR is the company based in Graz and acquired in 2000 by IFF. and it provides IFF perfumers, but also flavorists with the highest quality of natural ingredients. But we worked also with our AI technology, and we used AI to create the color blocks because we wanted to create different smells for the different colors. So, for example, we created a color block for the color yellow, red, blue, white, and we used AI, artificial intelligence, to select the ingredients which were associated with certain colors. So AI really helped us to define the ingredient palette for the different color blocks. So, and then it was a matter of finding the right balance of the color blocks. So really see in which level the color block should be compounded into the formula. So if you also see the level of the color blue is different than the level of the color green or blue, for example.
And also try to bring elements that Mondrian had in his composition, is to finding the balance that is vertical and horizontally. It's about the dynamism with the elements. So all these elements were part of the discussions with the perfumers and trying to bring, again, the palette, the technologies, the textures to life. Okay, and this was a strong iteration, and actually it was very similar that Mondrian process was, but that's something that we learned. This work was for 2 years, okay, moving the pieces. Okay, when the artwork is done, even he had a challenge. It took him 2 years to finalize, and he finalized it 2 weeks before dying. Okay, so it's and this one, I think the deadline for this one was what defined the end, because we would have been continue playing with the accords and with the different.
Was really on the last day still rebalancing the amount of the color blocks, so he was actually doing the same as Mondrian did.
I'm just like curious, as a fragrance person, like what would you have considered the fragrance family of this Mondrian fragrance? Is it woody? Is it citrus? Is it?
It's
not floral, I wouldn't think.
No, but I think it's when we described the color blue, it was quite marine.
Yeah.
The yellow citrus, the red quite fruity. So it was a combination of fruity, marine, floral. Also we used our LMR rose upcycled quality. But also the color white, which was quite transparent, the smell of the canvas. So,
and again, elements that go unnoticed, but it's interesting from a storytelling point of view. Mondrian, in his last years, he was a visionary, so he was upcycling the wooden boxes from fruit into his work and into his furniture. So even in the creative journey, the perfumers incorporated our upcycle collection from LMR into the materials that they use. So it was not only a chromatic interpretation into olfactive ingredients, but also other elements were considered into the creative brief.
Okay, so the use of ingredients that are
upcycled, use the materials upcycled. It was the chromatic, it was the balance, it was the dynamism. It was also bringing the element of modernity, so the fragrance smells very modern. The smell of glue, because that's what he used to mask, to create. So we brought all these elements as part of the creation.
So interesting. I mean, wow. So when you get to the end of this, then what kind of observations have you had from seeing people experience the event with the scent and how they interact? You've mentioned a few that are at least from the tests.
Yeah, so we have very strong empirical experience. Okay, we've learned, and I witnessed myself, and that I think I mentioned when we were talking about that. Part of these tours, we also do it with people with different capacities. Okay, we do it with blind people, people with dementia. We also do it with kids, and that's for me it was an aha moment. We're looking for an audience of how we can attract kids into museum, and I took the class of my daughter. They're 9-year-old kids, a bunch of crazy Dutch kids into the Reich Museum, okay? And I was mesmerized to see their reaction. Particularly, there's one kid called Lut. He's not as I used to be when I was a kid. And usually he's making trouble, generating trouble. He was smelling and engaged and slowing down and spending time in front of artwork that usually they would just walk by. They were stopping, they were reflecting. And then what we did is weeks after, what did they remember? And everybody remembers. So we did artwork with scent and without scent. They all remember the ones with scent. So that was part of the research that we are doing together with Ode Europa, is to really have a scientific evidence on how people can remember more, enjoy more the experience, what are the different elements that will engage them. So we have very much empirical evidence, but now we're building scientific evidence to show how scent can really enhance the experience, but also make it more memorable, and something that attracts new visitors to the museums. Okay? Especially when you talk about something that might not be with the digital world, how we can really attract. And smell has proven to be a very strong pull for, especially for younger audiences. For the museum nights in the Rijksmuseum, it won the Visitors Award on top of the Museum of the Tattoo, the Museum of the Handbag over there. So a lot of museums, people really engage through the hook of their noses. So I think that's something that we strongly believe that will not only enhance, but also make it much more memorable and immersive experiences.
Well, and plus, I mean, what you just said is that, blind people can then, sight impaired, can go to an exhibit and hear the curator talk about the artwork, but then smell what is depicted in the painting. So for them, it gives them a way of experiencing art that otherwise they wouldn't be able to, which is it's a fantastic opportunity for them.
And talking about the doing more good, it's another way of giving back and using scent to really to delight, but also to make memorable experiences. That's something that we're very proud and happy to see how we see this growing, because it's something that from very rare cases, now we see more and more this moving and be much more mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, we do. I mean, I know that I've seen quite a few museums in Holland, at least, that are doing it. But then, and we were just talking about this today, that Puig is in partnership with the Prado Museum in Madrid, and they're doing something now, which, as you said, it brings a different aspect to how you can bring scent into this environment.
And I think it elevates the whole offering. It elevates the whole experience, I think, for brands, for museums, but mainly also for visitors. So really, I think this is something that is doing baby steps, but eventually it will take off because it's something that it's memorable. I think it's very much something that people who are looking much more for new experiences, the creativity and the craft of the talent of the perfumers put into this new environment is something that we see more and more happening.
Definitely, definitely. Well, at this point, we're open to any questions that anyone has in the audience. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask about any part of doing this type of an event. Anyone? No? Okay. Valentina has a microphone in case anyone has a question. So up in the front.
Okay.
Right here, this gentleman here.
Thank you, guys. This is very interesting. I did have a question about the difficulties you mentioned in the beginning about how do we actually make sure that this works every time someone comes? Like, did you find a solution for the inventory, for the materials stock, so that the experience was seamless for everyone who did it? You mentioned the experience in Madrid with Puig, with Air Parfum. I know what they're doing, but again, you have to be aware of how much you have, how many people are going, and it's kind of limiting. Like, they are baby steps, but are we at a stage, because I haven't been, I would love to go. Are we at a stage where this is feasible, like it's happening, like you can have a usual number of visitors and still make it work instead of, you know, people just keeping a big line just to try to get it or not?
It's case by case. Again, there's no pattern that you can replicate elsewhere. I mean, even the museums cannot estimate the number of visitors. Yeah. Okay? Even one visitor can stay in front of the artwork for a very long time. Others can be just one sniff and move. So it's very difficult to predict that. What we are putting in place and what we're working closely with the museum is to have these controls regularly. Okay? So if a scent is fading out, they should be able to replenish. So it's also a lot of giving instruction on who and how to do this and how regularly, and slowly building that understanding. We do trials, okay? We do the controlled environment, but in real life it's very difficult to predict that, and it's case by case. Again, it's very difficult to anticipate that.
Thank you. And I do have another question just out of curiosity for the perfumer. You mentioned white. You are using something transparent. Would you mind, we don't need exact details, but were they musks? Were they Hedion?
Sorry?
For the white in the last
yeah.
work?
So it had
It's just out of curiosity.
also quite transparent, so it was mainly musk.
Musks?
Yes.
Yes, white musk. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, guys.
And that it comes, again, based on all the data, the artificial intelligence, all the data that IFF has gathered over the years. In a way, the perfumer has access to what's the color, what's the motion, what's the texture, and that's the palette. Now, how they apply it, that comes to the craft and the art of the perfumer, but this is really an enabler for them to really create, and yeah, white was the musk.
Yeah, the musk, yeah.
Thank you very much.
And also, we thought it was black, but in fact it's really a dark purple color on the painting. And there we also used like amber notes, like
Ambers.
white, woody amber, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Wow.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Here's another question.
Yeah, hello. I have a question. You were talking about that the intensity of smell sometimes is too much, sometimes is not enough. But what if the person, or you have these cases when someone got tired after the smell or have allergy on some ingredients? What you do, how you communicate, what you suggest, advise to those who attend such events?
That's actually a very good question, because that's a question that we get as part of the brief at the very beginning. Museums are very nervous to have somebody complaining that they have a skin rash or their eyes are itching. So all the fragrances, they have obviously the creative component, it has the performance part, but they're all talks proof. So even we go as creative as we can do, they're all have all the documentation to make sure that they're safe. Okay, safety, it's a key aspect, and that's something that we need to be very careful, because it can backfire very, I mean, especially when you're doing the first steps. If something goes wrong, it will go back to the beginning. So it's something that they're all safe. It's very difficult to anticipate how sensitive people are, because you have thousands of visitors. You will have some that are more sensitive to certain cells than others. What we want to bring is some kind of consistency in intensity. So when you smell them side by side, they have that balance. But obviously, you will have some that are more pungent and others that are more light. We had it even with the Three Kings, the smell of the Three Kings, the incense, the myrrh. The myrrh didn't smell that much, okay? But it was myrrh. So some are what they are, and some of them are lighter than others. So that's something that it is defined at the early stages, and knowing that the outcome, you will have naturally this kind of variables.
Any other questions from the audience? No? All right. Well, thank you so much, and please be sure that you go up and experience the exhibit. It's right across from the welcome desk where you came in today. And we'll see you roaming the show. Enjoy.
Thank you.
We're good. Yes. Good morning. You are.